This recording was made as part of the Oral History Project by St. Joseph's College Honors Program students in fall 2017 semester. It was recorded on Tuesday, November 28, 2017 at 1:30 p.m. in Dr. Travis's office, located in Toohey Hall, Brooklyn, New York. The interviewers are Karma Dolma, Peter Gabrowski, and Haley Scott. The narrator is Dr. Thomas Travis.
So first, I'd like to ask, how did you first come to St. Joseph College?
Okay, I just graduated with my doctorate from Bowling Green State University in Ohio. I worked a year there, and then I decided to head back to Long Island because I was married and my son was just born. So I wanted to get back to my hometown, which is in Sable, New York. And I was looking for work, and I noticed a tiny little ad in the New York Times that said Director, Division of General Studies. So I answered the ad, and I was interviewed by Sister Margaret Buckley and Sister Mary Florence Burns, and they hired me. So that's how I got here. So I had done a year's worth of work full time at Bowling Green State University, but this was pretty much my first real job outside of Bowling Green, and it turned out to be a very nice job over the years.
Are any of the faculty that you first worked with here still here?
Oh, interesting question. Yes. It's probably worth explaining, and this might tie into questions you'll be asking at another point. At that time, they hired me to be the director of the Division of General Studies, which was a separate division of the college, separate from the College of Arts and Sciences. So my guess is most of the faculty who you have are you're presumably coming during the day and your traditional age and the like. So you've got faculty members like, I could name their names, but in the School of Professional and Graduate Studies, it was then called the Division of General Studies. We relied more on adjunct faculty because our programs were professional programs. So we wanted people who were out in the field working, whether they be in the hospitals or in management or what have you. So that was more of a night and weekend faculty. And now that I'm in my current role, I'm in charge of academics for both campuses and all units. So that's a long way of saying that most of the faculty I dealt with in my early years here were night and weekend, and I don't see them as often. But there are people around here who've been here since the beginning. I'll use an example. Ray D'Angelo, Dr. D'Angelo. He got here I think a year before I did. So, so there are a few like that go way back. So I've been working my whole time, and it really goes back to 1978. That's almost 40 years or something like that. I've worked on both campuses. And so I got to know faculty on both campuses.
So would you consider, since you're saying how it's a night or weekend class, well, most of the courses are, yeah, there was more like an adult major that was like more
Yes.
work? Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I'm gonna I don't know where you are on your questions, but let me kind of explain how they set up the Division of General Studies and why they did. The Arts and Sciences College at that time was pretty traditional. When I first got here, most of the students were on the Brooklyn campus. Okay, I don't remember what the number was. I'm going to say 400 or 500. I'm picking a number out of the hat. But there was also just starting, and it was in its second or third year, this General Studies unit, which was designed specifically for working adults, most of whom at that time were nurses, who needed a bachelor's degree to get ahead in their career. But Sister Mary Florence was very smart because she realized that to serve this population, we would need more flexible policies, academically speaking, than would probably be appropriate for traditional undergraduate students. So for example, we set up a more liberal transfer credit policy. So we could take credits for some of their non-collegiate experiential learning, maybe nursing school or something like that, even if it wasn't in a college. The other thing we introduced was a thing called, at that time we called it life experience, but prior experiential learning, where students could get credit for what they learned earlier in their lives. So if they were on the school board for 10 years someplace, they might write 3 credits for community involvement in leadership or something like that. So it was a very different population, and what was smart about what Sister Mary Florence did, is a traditional faculty tends to be more traditional. And the divisions in colleges that served adults and non-traditional learners tend to be less traditional, more flexible. So Sister Mary Florence was smart enough to say, let's set this thing apart. And because of that, the traditional faculty allowed us to innovate and serve adult learners in ways that they would probably think, no, that's not appropriate for traditional age students, but it is okay for the non-traditional learners. So that enabled the School of Professional Studies, or the Division of Studies. I'll explain that in a second. I'm getting ahead of myself. But that enabled that division to be kind of an innovator at the college. And it grew and expanded, and particularly in those years, played a very important role in the financial strength of the college. I was stuttering a minute ago about the different names. What started out as the Division of General Studies changed names about 4 or 5 times. So it started out as the Division of General Studies, and I can't even remember all the interim names, but it finally ended up being the School of Professional and Graduate Studies, until such time as it was discontinued. But that might be a question that you'll be asking me later. Any other questions?
So I think you pretty much explained about General Studies program, and you said like it has like different, it has evolved into different like interim, you said? Like, but the main objective of that program, is it the same or it's different? Or has it been different?
It hasn't changed, actually. What has changed is organizationally, administratively, things have changed here. Okay, so the non-traditional programs with the more flexible curriculum still exist, and we still attract that population, and we still use the same kind of more flexible transfer credit policies, and we still have life experience, the prior experiential learning assessment. So that's all still in place. What has changed is we had a rather elaborate structure put in place. So I was the dean of that unit, and there were a number of people who reported to me, and secretaries, and a whole squad of folks serving the adult learners. And that was on both campuses. And about 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, in an effort to, I would say probably the principal reason for it was financial. There was a move to really do away with the separate division and try to integrate those functions into departments within the college, administrative and otherwise. So it doesn't exist anymore as an administrative unit. But for example, admissions has taken over the role of recruiting for the non-traditional adult learners. And that happens on both campuses. So they have people in their offices that just focus on that. And within academic advisement and at the registrar's office, there are people that have special expertise in serving adult learners, and they're picking up those functions. So it was integrated.
The other question, you worked for both Sister George Aquino Connor and Sister Elizabeth Hill. What do you see as some of the major changes that each of them made?
Yeah, they made a lot of changes. When I first came here in '78, the college was, a couple of things were happening, but Brooklyn was still the main event. Sister George Aquino O'Connor was basically trying to hold things together financially at that point, because we weren't in a really strong financial position. So she was very careful about how money was spent. I remember when the first IBM Selectric typewriter was introduced. You'll have to go Google that. You don't know what that is. Right, go Google that. But anyway, they cost about $900. All right, at that time, which was, might have been $10,000. So they allowed, I think Sister George allowed one in Lorenzo Hall and one in Tui Hall, you know, just to save money. So things were tight. But Sister George and Sister Mary Florence in particular were smart enough to know that this adult population could bring in large numbers of students and increase revenue accordingly. So Sister George allowed and encouraged the college to experiment and to create the Division of General Studies. So that was a big thing, and that took off. You know, at one point at the peak, there were about, I'm going to say 900 adult students on the Brooklyn campus and maybe 600 on the Long Island campus. So it was large numbers, and they were all doing nights and weekends kind of thing. So Sister George encouraged that, and Sister Mary Florence kind of made it happen. The other thing Sister George did at that time was the development of the Long Island campus. And I'm guessing on previous interviews you've heard more about that, but it was a pretty courageous move on her part to pull that off. It was a big expenditure, and it obviously has paid off. And Sister Elizabeth Hill, I think, continued in that vein. Sister Elizabeth was always open to new ideas, new programs. One of the nice things about working for Sister Elizabeth was if you had an idea and she thought it was a good one, she'd give you whatever support you needed to make it happen. So there was a lot of growth during Sister Elizabeth's reign, if you will, particularly with proliferation of academic programs, and both at the undergraduate and the graduate level. So, and of course, you know, both Sister George and Sister Elizabeth built buildings during their time on both campuses. So they were, you know, they were very active, very forward-thinking, and very nice to work for. I'll probably come back to this in a different way, probably a little bit later in the discussion. But the Sisters of St. Joseph's, I think, have set a tone for how it is that you're to behave as an administrator, and what it is you're doing here, which is, you know, serving students. And they really kind of live that. They set that example, and a lot of the people who came on board here as both administrators and faculty members kind of, well, first of all, they were selected because they seemed to fit that model. But once they were here, they certainly saw that behavior being modeled all the time. So there was a tendency, I think, for it to become a very humane environment, a very nice place to work.
So that leads me to asking you a little further about Sister Elizabeth Hill. Are you familiar with her 15-year plan?
Oh, our 15-year plan.
Yeah, so this year would actually be the 15th year of her plan.
Wow.
And I'm just wondering,
Okay.
some of the things included in that were like the construction of the Hill Center.
All right.
And
Yeah.
it was all about making the school more aesthetically pleasing,
Yeah.
more united as a campus, and changing the whole attitude of the campus.
Right.
Were there anything, like, depending on how familiar you are about it, that you really saw that like changed the course of the school and the history?
I don't remember the 15-year plan, but I do know that both the states, the New York State and Middle States, periodically asked us to come up with plans, strategic plans, and for a number of years that was my responsibility. My title at the end was Dean, School of Professional and Graduate Studies, and Vice President for Strategic Planning. So I was involved with a lot of strategic plans that were put together over the last 10 or 15 years. I think what I'd say is there were two major changes, and that was the one I already mentioned as far as the adult non-traditional population, and the other was the moving to the Long Island campus. Those were the real direction changers at the college, changes at the college. Other than that, I would say most of the growth that has taken place and the changes that have taken place over years have been incremental in nature. And I'm a big believer in incremental change. Change that sort of fits who we are, but takes us to a new step or a slightly different direction, and building on those strengths. So that I wouldn't say that beyond those two things I first mentioned that there have been any radical changes that have pushed us in one direction or another. I mean, there was the introduction of graduate programs, and that's had an important impact on us. But again, that was building on programs we already had at the undergraduate level, so it was a natural extension of that.
Awesome. So the one thing that we really didn't cover was how like the curriculums change here, like the academic standards, more intense now than they were. How's that changed?
Again, most of my efforts or work, has been with the non-traditional adults, so I can speak a little bit more to that. And basically, it hasn't changed much. With the non-traditional learners, from the very beginning, a lot of them were international students, particularly in the nursing profession. So when they came to us, they were certainly well qualified. These were smart folk. But sometimes their language skills were not the best, and we had to work with that. But as far as the rigor of the program that we offered then and the rigor of the program we're offering now, I would say that hasn't really changed, other than we have added courses. And I would say that on both the campuses, Brooklyn has had kind of an interesting new development over the past several years, and it goes back more than several years, with the ACES program, which was just a really innovative way of serving bright students who needed assistance with English as a second language. So that would be like a new population that we would go after. While that group has deficits in language, they certainly didn't have deficits intellectually, and as far as what they're capable of doing academically. So there have been changes like that, but otherwise I would say things haven't changed that radically. Now it might have been, back in the 40s or something like that, some of the young women who came here then might have really been the top of their class coming out of the Catholic schools. That fell off. Probably. Even just as I was beginning here, that was starting to change. So we were reaching out more to public schools, opening up admissions a little bit more, and serving students, slightly different academic levels, but not drastically so. We've always done a pretty good job of maintaining our standards, both as far as acceptance and what's expected out of students academically.
So, reaching out to the ACES program and students that aren't so strong in English,
right,
but still have the intellectual ability. So, in comparison to that, there was a really increase in enrollment, specifically about after you joined the staff.
Right.
If you look at the school's history of enrollment, it really shot up. And as you mentioned, you really expanded on the general studies program.
Yeah.
Are there any other reasons you think that since about when you joined the staff here, the enrollment really shot up?
One of the things about particularly we'll talk about the Brooklyn campus first. In serving the non-traditional students, we've had waves of students. By that I mean, in the first 10 years or so, the first wave was nurses who needed a degree. They were already registered nurses, maybe they had an associate's or a license, but they needed the next 2 years in order to get the bachelor's degree. So that was a whole wave of students that came in. And then things shifted out in the hospitals, and then that group started to decline in numbers. But then we ended up recruiting police officers, because police officers for a time needed a 4-year degree, and many of them didn't have it. So our numbers went way up with police officers. And then things changed after 9/11. Shifts shifted, and they changed their requirements. So more of the police officers coming in already had degrees. All right. So then we kind of enrollment went down a little bit, and we lost that population. And what's helping us now is we're working with veterans. So we have had a large boost of enrollment, particularly of adults, folks coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and the like. So at least with the non-traditional crowd, it kind of comes in waves. You serve different populations, and you try to have your antennae up, trying to figure out what's the next wave. I don't know what that is, but you're kind of always keeping your eye out. As far as arts and sciences on this campus, traditional age, I think those numbers have stayed fairly constant over time. They haven't changed much.
Yeah.
The big story in enrollment was what happened on the Long Island campus, is where things really grew, you know. So, you know, when that started in the late 70s, maybe they had 300 or 400 students out there, 500, something like that, you know, and now they've got 3,000. So and a lot of that has to do with its geographical location. There's not as much competition out there. Where in Brooklyn here, there's competition all around, so it's you know, it's tougher to get the big numbers.
So
in Brooklyn.
as you were saying with that, how you know, the different waves and at different times, different professions needed degrees and whatnot. But one thing that happened recently and affected a lot of colleges and businesses overall, to society, was the Great Recession of 2008.
Right.
How did that affect the college at the time?
Well, it certainly helped. It hurt our endowment, so we lost money in the endowment for a time, and so that played a part. We had less money in operating budget because we weren't, you know, generating the same amount of revenue. The other piece had to do with tuition reimbursement. And what that means is when you're working with adults, many of them already have jobs, whether it's in the nursing field or in banks or businesses or what have you. Okay. One of the things we found after the recession is they cut way back on their reimbursement. So it used to be that somebody could come and take 2 or 3 courses a semester and the business would pay for it, which was great for the adult learner coming back. But after the recession, a lot of that dried up. So that we took a hit on that, enrollment-wise. And just to show you the interrelationship between the revenue stream and the enrollment, the reason the veterans are coming in such numbers is the government is paying them to come. So that's a natural population. You know, it's one of the reasons we went after them in the first place, besides all the patriotic reasons, but those, you know, that was a big part of it.
You're the interim provost of the school. We would just like to know what you do with that role.
Okay.
And are there any plans you have for the school's academic criteria and curriculum in the future?
Okay, I'm an old man, so let me do one question at a time, because
Okay.
that's all I can remember. Let's start with the first one.
Okay.
The first one is, how do I see my role as a...
Yeah.
The provost is the chief academic officer at the college. So for example, you have Mike Hanafy here, who's the executive dean on the Brooklyn campus, and on the Long Island is Wendy Turgeon. She's the executive dean on the Long Island campus. They both report to me. Part of my role, I think, is to make sure that whatever is happening on one campus is happening on the other, that things aren't going in different directions. So that's a big part of it. There's a lot to do with policy that's college-wide that affects faculty. For example, right now we're reviewing the rank and tenure system here at the college, and that's very important to faculty. It speaks to how they get promoted and you know, what the title of their ranks are, et cetera, and you know, the Board of Trustees has asked us to review our policies and revise them. So I'm involved with a select group of faculty, and we meet every other week to discuss, you know, what those new ranks might look like. You know, when does a faculty member go up for promotion? What are the criteria for that? So that would be an example of how you would be working with faculty on a common project. And the other thing I'm doing, working for Dr. Bloomgarden, has to do with, again, planning for the future. So and also administrative assessment of offices. That's a little bit beyond the normal academic role of provost. Excuse me, but it's something I have a lot of experience with. So Dr. Bloomgarden is just kind of tapping that.
You said that the Long Island campus and the Brooklyn campus, you make sure they're on the same page.
Yeah.
So if there are new courses instituted in the Brooklyn campus, would they necessarily be instituted in the Long Island campus as well?
Not necessarily. You could have a situation where there was the need of a course in Brooklyn. I'll use an example that's kind of obvious: the history of the city of New York, or something like that. So, that makes a lot more sense in Brooklyn than it might on Long Island, that kind of thing. But the place where you want to make sure that the two campuses don't start getting too far apart is when, for example, if you have the major in hospitality management here and you have the major in hospitality management there, you don't want to have two different sets of curricular requirements. So, we're always on the lookout to make sure that folks aren't straying off, what's expected.
So, since you're the interim, do you have any plans to possibly maybe become the permanent provost?
No, my wife won't let me.
Okay.
Yeah. And no, initially, Don and the board asked me to do it for 1 year. And the same with Michael, that's Dr. Hanafi, and Wendy, Dr. Turgeon on Long Island. I'll use first names. Initially, the plan was for us just to be interim for 1 year. But as you probably know, we have a Middle States visit coming up in March, okay? And Don being the president, didn't want to be in the middle of a search for a new provost and new deans during the exact same time period that we would be experiencing a Middle States visit. So he decided he wanted more continuity. So that was when he realized that it would make more sense if we keep me on, keep Wendy, keep Michael on for another year. So my plan is to, I'll probably help in the search for the provost and maybe one or more of the deans at the time.
Gotcha.
And I don't know whether their spouses are going to allow them to do it or not. But I know mine ain't. So I definitely got 1 more year left in me.
You said that the Middle States are coming to visit the college?
Yes.
What are you guys doing in preparation for their visit?
Boy, a massive amount of work has gone into it over the last 2 years. There have been faculty committees on both campuses, a lot of research done, preparation of the reports, 100 pages long, so much work. Fortunately, I missed most of it. It was done. I was on transitional retirement, so for 4 years I was just teaching 2 courses because I wanted to retire, but not fully 4 years ago. So I've just been brought in this year, and so I had a part in putting the finishing touches on the Middle States self-study, and that's the report that goes to the team, and then the team comes here, and then they see if what we said in the report kind of coincides with what they're observing, and they're also in a position to say where they think we're strong or where we're weak or what have you. So, and we just, as a matter of fact, had the team visitor here yesterday for a preliminary visit. And she was telling us areas where, oh boy, you really look good here, but you might do a little more work there, that kind of thing.
Like you were saying, the whole interview, the whole discussion, you have a very, seems to be that you have a very influential role in the college. How does it feel to have such an influential role?
Yeah, it's funny. When I first got it, I was announced and everything. I don't know whether you ever had that experience where you're sitting behind a desk thinking, should I really be here? Do I belong in this spot? Yeah. So I've had a lot of those moments since I've been here. But it's been a real honor, and it's also a responsibility. One of the things that the board asked of Don as a priority was to pay close attention and develop where he could faculty morale. Okay? That was part of his big assignment. So in picking his team, he picked folks, and when I say his team, I mean Wendy, Michael, myself. He picked folks who he felt had good relationships with faculty and cared about faculty and wanted to support faculty. There's the honor part, but there's also the responsibility part to do the best you can. For me, it's more faculty-based than student-based. When you're talking about the deans, I've got much more of a student orientation than they do the faculty orientation, although they have a lot of responsibility with the faculty as well. But it was an honor. It was fun.
Do you still teach the 2 courses along with being the intern?
No, I couldn't do it. It's
too much.
Yeah, it really is too much. It's a very demanding position. Actually, Michael and Wendy each ended up teaching a class or 2 by accident because they didn't know that they were going to be given the position. So they're really struggling this semester, trying to do other administrative stuff and teaching at the same time. But no, I couldn't do both.
What classes did you teach?
Oh, when we got here, with the non-traditional learners, we wanted to put in place some courses that were specifically geared to them. And we got some money from different associations. Not a lot of money, but enough to develop a few courses. And the three that were the most fun was a course called Problem Solving for Professionals, Critical Thinking for Professionals, and Adults in Transition. I've taught all of them, but my two favorites are the Critical Thinking course and the Adults in Transition course. And of the two, the Adults in Transition is kind of the most interesting to me, because it focuses on sort of the psychology of adult development. But we designed the course with the idea that returning adults are kind of in a new place in their life. You know, they're whatever else they were doing before, now all of a sudden they say, okay, I'm going to try to get a college degree. So they're in a time of change and transition in their lives. So what we did is we spent a lot of time trying to assemble the literature that speaks to adults and adults who are in transition and what that means and as far as where they are in their psychological development, etc. So it's fun to create a course that is very relevant to where they are in their lives. And the idea was that if they could understand from a psychological and sociological standpoint exactly what was happening to them and what their opportunities were for growth and development, they would be in a better position to grow and develop more if they could understand it in some kind of theoretical context. It's a fun one.
You talk so highly about teaching. Is that would you say that is your most memorable moment in SJC? And if not, what is?
Actually, it sounds awful. I think I'm a better administrator than a teacher. I mean, I was a good enough teacher. I got my fours and, you know, oh, best professor I ever had kind of stuff. But I never felt like that was really what I'm good at. I'm better at being an administrator. I'm really good at building teams and getting people working together towards goals. This kind of slides back to something I was alluding to earlier. St. Joseph's has really been, you know, I so often say outside of marrying my wife, St. Joseph's was the smartest decision I ever made, because it really is a community, and I feel like I'm part of that community, and I like being part of that community, and it gives me a sense of meaning and purpose in my life that I otherwise might not have. So there's not one memorable thing. The whole experience has been very, very important in my life.
And so the whole interview basically is about your whole life here at St. Joseph's, but kind of just get an idea more of like who you are as a person. If there was something besides being an administrator and a teacher here that you could have went back when you're at Bowling Green and like changed your mind and did something else for your life, like what would have that have been?
It's a really good question. You often think about what if I had done this or that or whatever. I mean, I could have, at an earlier point, gone into business and the like. I'm glad I didn't, because it's not a good match with who I am and what's important to me and my personality and everything. I'm much more about, I'm not a bottom line profit motive kind of person. I'm much more about working together with people to make things and improve systems and create new programs. And there's a financial component to that, but it's not the driving component. And I'm much better suited for this than I would have if I had gone in that other direction. So whatever little degree of success I've accomplished here, I don't think I would have succeeded to the same degree in another sphere. I landed in the right place.
Well, we want to thank you for your time, and I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sure my two peers here did as well, and hope you enjoyed it yourself as well.
Thank you. No, it was fun.
Thank you for your time again.
It was fun. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brought back some memories.
It's nice meeting you.
Yeah. Good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet you. Good to meet you. Thank you. So this is good. You guys are doing this. This is really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I liked it.
Yeah.
went easier than I thought.
Yeah.
Was that?
It went easier than I thought.
Oh, yeah, no, well, you had good questions and it flowed and you introduced them in kind of a natural conversational sort of way, so it worked that way.